Hi, I'm Linda Reeb, and welcome back to our next segment of Mom's Mentoring videos. This one is going to be about an interesting paradoxical topic called submission. And after a decade of talking about this topic together with moms, I know that sometimes it creates blood pressure elevation, skepticism, sometimes uncertainty as to what the word even means. So bear with me, because this is definitely one of the paradoxes in the Bible. Over and over in the Bible, we come across things that seem a little upside down. The idea of forgiveness instead of taking revenge. If somebody's mean to you, why would you not pay them back, right? The idea of, hey, if you want to be great, be the servant of all. So there are just some paradoxes in the Bible, and the topic of submission is definitely one of them. It can seem like a downer for women, and I'd like to offer a perspective that it can actually be something that elevates women and raises her up. The Bible says, our theme verse at Mom's Mentoring, Proverbs 14 verse 1, the wise woman builds her house. And the Bible seems to indicate that one of those building blocks for building a strong marriage and a Christian family is the idea of submission. So let's jump in and unpack that a little bit. In the Bible, the husband is referred to as the head. A body has one head, just like a company has one CEO. In that role, the head has responsibilities, and when it's functioning well, it's a blessing. Whether it's a blessing to their family or a blessing to the company, the head has a job to do. The head isn't better than the rest of the body, but it does play a unique role. The CEO isn't better than the person who's working in the shipping department, but he has a unique role and responsibilities to fulfill as the CEO. So if a man is called by God to step up and really lead his family as a servant leader, what human, sinful, needy, broken man can do that well all on his own? So there's a rhetorical question for you, right? And does he need a weak woman or a strong woman to come alongside and to lend her energy to help him in a way that allows him to become the person that God intends for him to be? If a man is called as head to oversee the well-being of his wife and family such that they thrive emotionally, mentally, physically, socially, spiritually, and lots of times, not always, but certainly lots of times, financially, the husband is a contributor, if not the main contributor to the family. And so that can be a lot of hats for that man to wear. So my question is, what are the things for that tough job that a wife can do to come alongside to undergird and support the guy in his role and in his efforts in those areas? What things are going to tear him down or close him down? What makes it risky for him to attempt to even lead and tempt him to be passive, a doofus at worst, a helper at best, while the CEO mom has everything under control? Thank you very much. I can imagine someone by now saying, well, wait a minute, what about a partnership? Aren't we supposed to be 50-50? Or I'm a natural leader. I'm a much better natural leader than my husband is. And so it makes sense for me to lead and him to be the helper. Well, you know what? We're trying to find some balance here because the Bible talks about this idea. And if you are a natural leader, there are so many areas in your family where you can use those skills to bless your family and still be under the headship of your husband as the head of the family. And it can be a wonderful thing. A smart guy knows when his wife is a crackerjack at managing all the finances, the admin stuff, organizing the family calendar, arranging for extended family get-togethers, all those sorts of things. And a smart guy will say, hey, you are the whiz here, and I am not. You do this role, I'll do this role. And of course, there's always an element of partnership. So this is more about an attitude of being willing to come underneath the umbrella of the headship of someone that God has said, I have a job for this person to do. They can't do it well on their own. They will need your help. Okay, so it's not so much about roles as it is an appreciation for God-given structure that calls men to be fully men while offering a woman a platform that allows them to be completely them, using all of their abilities and strengths, but sheltered under an umbrella of protection and care. It ties in a little bit with the idea from that book, Love and Respect. Men want to be respected, women want to be cherished. Submission done well helps both of those things along. So let's look at the idea of submission. If you just read a Huffington Post magazine article, Atlantic Monthly, just any old secular magazine, you might get these words in your mind as part of what it means to be submissive. The world's view of submission. Here's some of the words: non-resistant, unassertive, sweet-talking, no initiative, cowering, second class, inferior, lower, no backbone, subservient. You're thinking, oh, why would I want to be that or do that, right? Okay, so now let's look at the scripture's view of submission and think about some other words, and then we'll talk about it a bit. Let's think about the word faithful, obliging, loyalty, willing, completing, flexible, allegiance, adaptable, blending, agreeing to. Kind of reminds me of the word amenable that I heard in a movie one time. The guy asked the girl, "Why are you so amenable tonight?" Just easy to get along with. And so those are some of the words that go with the scripture's view of submission. So here's a little story to go with it. I've watched women who were tired. They're tired of just being responsible in every area for everything. They're worn out. And you guys know, when you have little children and you're just getting a marriage off and running and a young family established, there are a lot of hats to wear and there are a lot of jobs to do. So sometimes the idea of submission is confusing, I agree. Sometimes women are bone weary. And so my friend Holly said she was willing to give this idea a try. And she was surprised by the outcome. She had 2 little boys. She now has 3. Her husband worked as a trainer for NASCAR, and so he was gone and he traveled a lot. So she felt like he has that going and I'm responsible for everything relative to the family. All the big decisions, all the small decisions, she was just trying to handle everything. And when she found herself really exhausted and bone weary with the whole proceeding of it all, she realized, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to give this idea of asking him to step up and be the head of our family a shot and see what happens. So she did. And she asked him if he could be more involved and if he could just think of himself as the head of the family. She would come alongside, complement and blend and be willing and undergird and support him. But she wanted him in that role as head of their family. And so she said it was a blessing to her when her husband Greg stepped up and she felt like all the family decisions were not resting on her shoulders. And she described it as a lighter way to live. She felt lighter. I liked that word. Her husband moved from a passive role at home to an engaged one as she learned to respect his ideas and his style of parenting. So if Holly had insisted that everything had to be done her way, she may have gotten that. She had to be willing to be flexible and adaptable to how Greg led, to his style of parenting, which was not exactly the same as how she did things at home. And so I've met some women who said, you know, I want things to go my way at home. But when they do that and they CEO everything home-based, then their husband becomes just another one of the kids. A big kid, but a kid that has to be managed and cared for. And I've seen that happen over and over. So I think it's worth thinking about, talking about. One caveat here before we go any further is the topic of abuse. Submission has nothing to do with a husband saying jump and a wife says how high. It has nothing to do with a husband having a wife under his thumb. God has created husbands and wives equal. Different roles, different genders, absolutely equal. There's no subservient, lower, inferior, second class. None of those words apply, that they're just not true. But if a husband is being abusive, mentally, physically, with his words, just you're in a dysfunctional situation, it's not safe, I would never encourage you to just stay put, endure, put up with any of those things. No. Get yourself to a safe place, get the help you need. So that is not what this is about. I just want to be clear on that. So then let's move on. What if you feel like, okay, if I have my husband be really in that position as head of our home, what if he makes decisions I don't like? What if he makes a mistake? What if I don't agree? Well, what if you assumed ahead of time that that would be the case? Yup, that's going to happen. And know that his heart and his mind are in God's hands. And pray. So you can see how sometimes we don't like the idea of submission because it makes us vulnerable and it puts us in a spot where we can't have the control that we sometimes yearn for. And we have to depend on God to work in our husbands' minds and hearts instead of us being in charge. There's an idea. So, what if you pray both for your husband in that role and for you in your role as you choose to resist the temptation to take over, to manipulate, to control? We're good at those things. That's part of the fall. It is in us to manipulate, to control, to take over. And sometimes not in really pretty ways, right? If you're like me. As you wait, trusting God to work, you'll be surprised at how God grows your own character. And again, you have to decide, is that something I want? Character growth is, it's work, right? It's good work. I encourage you to go for it, but it's work. So let me tell you a little story about Lloyd and I. We got married when we were 20. So you can surmise our collective maturity levels at that season of our life. When we've wrestled through all of this over the almost 40 years that we've been married, and overnight, Lloyd did not turn into a mature, seasoned leader of our family. No. And I was most certainly in the early years not even knowledgeable about how to undergird and support him well. There's a verse in 1 Peter that says, "Wives, understand and support your husband in ways that honor the master." It takes time, doesn't it, to learn to really understand your husband. When he lashes out in anger, when he has a short fuse, what's the why behind the what? Doesn't it take a long time to figure that guy out? That's the important work of building a marriage, understanding, supporting your husband. With lots of prayer and talking and a dogged determination to believe that God's structure for our marriage was for our good, we began to see fruit growing on our marriage tree. At times it seemed so upside down. I would disagree with Lloyd. I'd head upstairs. A door or two would get slammed here and there. But I knew enough to know that I needed to stay up there and pray and wait until I was under control before I came down and re-engaged with my spouse, determined to come alongside, to undergird, to support, not to fight and not to wrest control. So here's a story. I always thought our backyard would be the hub yard in the neighborhood. I wanted to have a sandbox and a trampoline and a bunch of different things. Turns out my husband wanted to have a happy family life, but he did not want those things in his backyard. And I remember just being appalled by that. Now, what would have happened if I had really dug in my heels and insisted that all those things happen? Well, I could have made them happen. I could have just said, forget you, I'm doing this. And instead I didn't. And so our kids played on the trampoline at the neighbors, and they engaged in lots of things in our backyard, but not the things I had envisioned. And then my husband, because I respected his desire to have a backyard that had some aesthetics to it and just didn't turn into the jungle gym for the children, and he really, really appreciates pretty backyards, and I decided, you know what, I'm not going to fight on this. I'm just not. And so then he felt respected by my decision to let him lead in an area that felt so contrary to how and who I was. But then he engaged in a way that he brought, excuse me, his best thinking and his best efforts into planning really fun times for our family. Different than what I expected, different than what I would have done. But our kids were not shortchanged on all sorts of fun in the neighborhood, in our family, and when we took day trips here and there. And so looking back now, at the time, I was just like, whoa, this can't be happening. But now I realize it did happen. And because I didn't fight him on it, our marriage was preserved. He was respected. I learned a lesson about not insisting that everything go my way. And our children did not suffer because of it. So just a story by way of encouragement. And I want to reference one fruit of the Spirit, and that is meekness, because it goes along so well with this idea of submission. You think about Moses. He was a world leader. I mean, he was gangbusters, changing the world, leading 4 million people through the Red Sea out of Egypt. The Bible calls him the meekest man that ever lived. Jesus says, "Come to me, I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." A world leader, Jesus Christ, meek. So what does that look like for us? What does that really mean? Well, meekness is not indecision, female fragility, weakness. That's not what meekness is. Let me read you another list of words. Meekness is teachability, a readiness to lay down my fixed notions, my certainties about the rightness of, I've always done it this way, I've always thought like this, I've always said it like this. I've always thought that our backyard would have these pieces of child equipment in them for our children to play on. It's a spiritual quality, a fruit of the Spirit, and it's something we can learn. It shows in the kind of attention we pay to one another, our tone of voice, our facial expressions. Would our husbands be blessed if we chose to allow God to shape and mold in us the character of meekness? And if we adopted the idea that we don't diminish ourselves by choosing submission done well, done correctly, done biblically, but that actually it elevates us and offers us the option of being cherished, protected, cared for, and gives us the very important work of coming alongside a human man, faults and all, and lending our full strength to undergird, to support, to be creative, flexible, adaptable, and to bring our best to help him bring his best, which of course ultimately blesses us and our family. So there's kind of comes full circle. So submission and meekness, two Bible ideas that are quite fascinating. Thanks for your openness to dig into these topics, and I hope you've gotten curious enough to engage in some stimulating conversations about these two things with your own spouse and with your friends.